Pump the dead demos with electricity, shock those particles back to life, and voila, we've got ourselves a
new Stranger Things video.
You want the
Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things Season 5 Volume 2 is here, and there is a lot to say. We will discuss both the good and the bad, because it's never as simple as just one extreme. There are some positives here, and there is a lot of potentially great ideas. However, there are also problems here. Quite a few. In fact, I think there's one specific problem at the heart of everything, one issue that feels like a root cause bogging down this season with cumbersome structure, plot-heavy dialogue, jarring pacing. We're going to discuss what that root cause is, we're going to discuss all of it. What exactly can we make of Stranger Things Season 5 so far? But first, let's look at a cool train. So yeah, normally I spend a bit of time discussing the positives, because, as I say, there are always positives. I know it's fashionable to just completely trash things on the internet, but it's never quite that simple. However, I'm not going to dwell here too long, because I discussed most of the positives already in my last 2 videos about the first 4 episodes of this season. It doesn't feel worthwhile to just go over the same points again. However, I will touch on 2 of them, the most kind of obvious ones, because they're relevant for what we see of Volume 2 here. The first being entertainment. This is still an entertaining show with some genuinely great action set pieces. Personally, a very action-heavy kind of Marvel-style show isn't my thing. It's not my personal taste, but a lot of people do like that, and for them, there are some great moments with some solid direction and effects. Vecna storming the military base at the end of episode 4 was a really, really great sequence. And so, in episodes 5, 6, and 7, we get similarly great sequences, only less so. If big action set pieces is your thing, then I think Volume 2 probably looks slightly underwhelming in comparison. We've got Will holding off Henry so Max and Holly can run. Pretty solid, but also pretty short and kind of repetitive when this has already happened in the show. We've got the Demodogs storming the hospital, a solid sequence, albeit with a kind of goofy ending. And then we've got the gang breaking through the military base and back into the Upside Down, which is also a pretty solid sequence, but also very brief and more set up for the finale than actual payoff in itself. And again, kind of repetitive in a sense we've already seen them execute a plan to break into the Upside Down before. So these 3 episodes give us mostly well-shot action scenes, but also less big, less suspenseful, less coherence than the similar scenes from the earlier episodes this season, which I think can then make this season feel less like it's ramping up to something than it's running out of steam. That said, we can all assume the finale is going to be massive in its set pieces, so maybe no one will care about this point by the time that episode is released. In general, based on the admittedly small sample size of the polls I released, people are finding this season less enjoyable than they did to begin with. After Volume 1, 19% of people said it was brilliant, then after Volume 2, only 11% said it was great. Is action set pieces that are also admittedly less than they were the only positive? Obviously not. It's not even the main one for me. The other main one I think is the heart to this story. I was able to make an entire video previously breaking down the psychology of Henry and Will and all of the sometimes fairly subtle depth and emotion expressed through their characters. When I looked at it, there was a lot more to say than I expected. And now in episodes 5, 6, 7, there is still stuff to sink your teeth into. Yes, there are some very good ideas, and I think Dustin and Steve's dynamic and the emotional payoff in particular for them does work well. The show built off of what was a big event in the last season, Eddie dying, and then there was a brief yet coherent build up this season. We saw Dustin struggling with depression and grief. We saw him deliberately putting himself in dangerous situations to cause himself pain or potentially skirt around the edges of his own death. And we saw his friends, not that they didn't care or understand, but you saw the split in their group dynamic. They were all shouldering the more pragmatic feelings of we need to get on with fighting Vecna, we need to be a team, where Dustin Dustin was shouldering the feelings of grief, and that split creates friction between them, where he then feels like they don't care enough about Eddie, and they feel like he doesn't care enough about fighting Vecna, even though all of them do actually care. Steve then floating in this weird space where he's like a rival to Eddie in Dustin's mind. The friction it creates between the two of them is interesting, and we start this season with them kind of comically bickering, but then that escalates into genuine argument and genuinely hurting each other, especially when Steve says that Eddie got himself killed for no reason, that he was playing the hero when it wasn't necessary. Oof. You know, we get an actual fallout between them as a result. That's good. That's some actual weight to their character under that. Weight to their character dynamics until necessity forces Dustin to finally admit the one thing he's been holding back. Or one of the things. One of the other big reasons he's been keeping himself so distant and tetchy towards Steve is because he's afraid of losing him too. And when he now almost does lose him, suddenly the emotion finally bursts out of his chest, and it's great. And then seeing that ladder sink into that chasm, knowing Steve too would have died there had Dustin not held him back. This is really solid stuff. But yeah, there are other moving moments too, or at least moments that did somewhat move me. Seeing Lucas hold Max as she came back to life, I won't say it packs a thematic punch, but they are both characters I cared about last season, and it's a sweet reunion. Even Jonathan and Nancy, I don't think that scene was exactly the right time for a big heart-to-heart, and I will discuss some problems there later on, but in principle, it's a nice idea. I'm glad to see them breaking up in a way that feels mature and still loving, because you rarely see that in fiction. Normally it's either a massive fallout where they now can't stand each other at all, or they perfectly rekindle their love and they're stronger than ever. I don't think that's always the reality, so I do really like the idea of this. I think it saves what has been a consistently tiresome love triangle between her and Steve by finally shifting that dynamic into something more interesting. Despite faults we are about to discuss, this season is still capable of some suspenseful, some entertaining, and some moving moments. It can still mostly hook you when it needs to. But perhaps that also sums up the problems here. These are moments. It feels more like a season of different moments than it does a neatly woven tapestry that unfurls smoothly before you. Yeah, let's discuss the problems now. Well, first...
It's like he weakened Hawkins, so when the Abyss and Hawkins collide...
They become one.
He's remaking the world.
Anvil. The World Anvil. World Anvil! Yep, they are sponsoring this video. World Anvil is an online tool for game masters, for writers, for tabletop RPG players and world builders. An online tool for designing worlds, creating characters, chronicling history, planning and managing campaigns from a plethora of different games. My best friend uses it for our D&D campaign, I use it for planning my novel. Far better and easier than the scraps of random A4 paper stuffed into a drawer that used to constitute my creative process. Not only can I keep everything in one place where I can easily edit anything I want to, but I can create timelines, hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles, family trees, a billion other things. You can even link them all to maps, like here's this basic map I made years ago. If I click on the character Tess, it sends me straight to her page where everything is redacted, and that's like the most basic thing you can do with your maps. There's other creators whose world building looks so much nicer than mine. There's a whole community network on World Anvil if that's your thing. There's so many different cool features for everything you may possibly need. In general, there's been lots of great updates recently, making the interface even simpler and smoother than it already was. World Anvil is great. I am genuinely passionate. I hope you can hear that. And if you desire, if you crave, if you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description or the pinned comment. And if you just want to try out the free version, then go for it. There's no time limit. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. The reason it feels like a mash of different moments, I think, is partly because what happens within those moving or effective moments very rarely matters to the rest of the story at all. It's like we disappear into a small pocket of something that feels big for a second, only to then zoom out again afterwards and discover it's tiny, that there was insufficient setup and then insufficient impact afterwards. Dustin and Steve being a great example of this. Because of Dustin's stubborn insistence that he's right, Nancy and Jonathan try to destroy the exotic matter, and because of Dustin and Steve's arguments, the walkie-talkie breaks, so they can't warn Nancy not to shoot it when Dustin realizes otherwise. Dustin is screaming into a broken walkie-talkie that if they shoot it, there will be catastrophic consequences.
You will die! We will die! Holly will die! Everyone will die!
And then the episode ends with Nancy pulling the trigger, and I think, yes, good. I actually feel tense. Something catastrophic is about to happen. Maybe Nancy and Jonathan are even about to die, or just something of similar big consequence. But then we get to the next episode and we see a hole is ripped in the wall and Steve's car gets sucked into oblivion, but it's not particularly dangerous even for the people right there. Elle doesn't really break a sweat getting her and Hopper and Carly to safety. Jonathan and Nancy end up in a room slowly filling up with emulsion paint, but we don't really understand what's happening there, why it is or why it stops. That scene is more concerned with a heart-to-heart than genuine tension or consequence, and you know, I get the idea. One little gunshot isn't enough to completely destabilize this exotic matter. It is temporarily rocked before gradually stabilizing again. That makes total logical sense, but when you build up this moment as one that will have huge narrative impact, and then it doesn't really impact anything, what we feel is a weak story that has cheated us. It told us there would be catastrophic consequences, and then there were barely any at all. Not only is that anticlimactic, but it means the story doesn't actually progress. Narratively speaking, nothing really develops. Plot things change, but not story. I mean, I suppose at a stretch you can say it does push Nancy and Jonathan to break up, but again, there's very little relationship drama going on anyway. So that doesn't change much for the story. You know, spouting plot-related dialogue looks the same, whether or not Nancy and Jonathan are still a couple. This big moment where the camera, the music, the effects all place massive emphasis on how very moving and monumental it all is, these two characters breaking up. And I am somewhat moved, but not in a way that's earned. I feel kind of tricked into tears, or not even tears, but I feel tricked into emotion by something that has to be forced and overly sentimental to elicit that emotion, because there isn't enough genuine setup to do so organically. And then once it's done, you suddenly zoom out and it barely matters at all to anything going forwards. It means so little Nancy and Jonathan don't even tell anyone they've broken up. What I'm saying is this season feels devoid of impact, because I could make this same argument again for almost everything that happens this season. Hopper almost blew himself up, which Elle is upset about, but because there's so much plot to get on with, we only get a slight grumbling second of dialogue between them before this again doesn't matter. Will gets captured, and I think maybe tortured by Henry, but all they have to do is drive 11 to the tank and then he's saved, and again, zero consequences to what happens there. It builds up the idea of some big threat because, oh no, Will has let slip to Henry where Max is. I'm not sure why Henry needs a spy to figure out that the body of a girl who almost died but not quite would be in Hawkins Hospital, like obviously she would be, but he figures it out, and he gives an ominous threat about making Max suffer and die. The threat scares Holly, and again we're supposed to feel tense. Ooh, there could be big consequences here. No. Everybody gets out fine. It doesn't really matter that Will showed her where Max was. All Henry does is send a few minions to the hospital and then immediately give up when they fail. There are no consequences to anything that goes wrong this season, which means no threat we believe in, and no weight to those moments of failure, and no narrative progression. Loads of plot happens, but no one is substantially changed by anything. I can't believe 7 episodes in and nobody has died except maybe Ted. It's weird how we're never even shown him. Maybe Derek's family, if they're still tied up in that barn and completely forgotten about. I guess they might have starved to death. It's not just that nobody dies though. Characters don't necessarily need to die, but they need to be emotionally impacted in ways that changes the events going forwards. Dustin was emotionally impacted by Eddie's death in season 4, and that is great. That adds weight to him here. It stops him feeling as static as all of the other characters. And if we carry on that hospital example, Robin, Vicky, Lucas and Max in the hospital don't necessarily need to die to feel the weight of danger here. In fact, there's almost something impactful when Robin is telling Lucas he has to turn the music off, but he won't do that because Max is coming back and he doesn't want to lose her again. This is an interesting conflict they have to silently argue about while hiding, only they then seem to immediately give up on this point and they all just sit there with the music still playing. But you know, what if Robin had taken it upon herself to turn the music off, or had thrown the stereo away way to distract the demodogs, something that might then make Lucas feel devastated. Sure, it would still be a bit of a cop-out because Max would then come back regardless, but it does add some weight to Max's whole point that she didn't need the music. And it leaves Lucas potentially feeling angry with Robin for what he originally thought was effectively killing Max. Yeah, that's still pretty weak, but it's just a vague example to hopefully convey the point that I'm not saying people necessarily need to die, it's just we need impact on the characters in general, and impact on the world, whatever that might be. Karen showing up for a Deus Ex Machina in an incredibly goofy way is not only goofy, not only quite repetitive, but also undermines everything. All of the failures this season, the lows lead to zero consequence, and even the successes affect nothing. We spend ages this season of Holly slowly working her way towards an escape, and then she does escape only to immediately be recaptured, and then we go all the way back to square one, making all of those events feel a little pointless and repetitive. The only thing that's really changed is that we know the Upside Down is a wormhole, not Henry's world, but you know, thematically, emotionally, what does that really mean? That's lore that's conceptually interesting, but story-wise doesn't feel substantial. And okay, I'm being a little bit flippant, because Max escapes, that does matter. However, Holly is still the main character in all of these scenes, and I feel like if she was going to have to go back, you could have given her some agency in that, could have emphasised the tragedy. I like the idea that Holly realises in this moment she can't escape as easily as Max right now, and for various possible plot reasons you could write in, Holly decides she has to go back to the other kids. That's an interesting decision. Max could then argue that she doesn't want to leave Holly behind, that she's going to go back with her too, but Holly insists no, Max has to leave so that she can explain to the others what's going on here. Max has been stuck here 2 years, she should get out. That replaces this very abrupt, random 2-minute scene of Holly almost escaping before suddenly being pinged back for some vague reason. Replaces that with a character getting to make an actual decision. And it strengthens the idea of Holly the heroic, that bravery doesn't have to mean the courage to fight back in ways where she kept freezing. Bravery can mean the courage to willingly walk back into danger on her own because there's something more she has to do. So again, it's not necessarily that Holly doesn't escape, it's how arbitrarily she's denied that. It's like the reverse of a fake-out death, a fake-out escape. Plus, it's again incredibly repetitive, having been told in exposition how Max almost escaped only to be stopped by Henry and having to run to the cave. Then they both almost escape only to be stopped by Henry and have to run to the cave, and then they both almost escape again, only Holly is stopped by Henry. The repetition weakens the impact even more, but I think I've laboured this point for long enough now, so let's move on to a bigger point. Now, I made the case in my last video that the problem with this series is that there are now too many characters, or too many main characters, who all demand a moment of the spotlight to shine. I said it puts the season in a weird position pacing-wise, where so many characters need this space for their arcs to breathe that they're now cramped for room. But if you slowed the pace down so they can all get more room, then the pacing overall of this show would feel too slow. I said that the general beats each episode are hitting are the right speed. It's not technically the pacing that's wrong, but because there's so many characters to fit in around those story beats, none of their development feels organic. All of them feel rushed, and so it feels like too fast a pace, even though it probably technically isn't. Does that make sense? If not, I suppose you can watch that video. That was my theory, but I said at the end of that video, hey, I was only talking about the first 4 episodes at the time. I'm sure now that the story has gotten going, they might find more room for some of this stuff in the later episodes, and now we've seen almost all of the later episodes, I suppose they technically do. I mean, as we've already discussed, they do include some character-based scenes. Dustin gets the space he needed. That's good. Jonathan and Nancy certainly get a moment. Holly gets this moment where Max just straight up explains to her why she's brave. Will gets to come out. Those are all technically character moments, but again, it's the same issue, except for maybe Dustin. There's so little room, they happen inorganically. Even if technically that scene is very long, it's not always just about runtime so much as finding beats in the story where you can include things like build up and payoff, because we've got like 10 minutes of Max and Holly talking, so much talking to convey a point that could probably have been expressed within like 3 lines of dialogue. Will's coming out scene is 6 minutes of talking, and it should be very moving. I've been waiting for this scene for years now. And yet, if you compare it to Will accepting himself in episode 4, that scene was far more impactful and more moving, and it accomplished that in a third of the runtime it took them here. And we do get a moment here setting up Will coming out. Robin encourages him to, but is that enough? Even the key reason for Will to open up. I mostly like the idea that Will still feels a bit of shame and insecurity about what his friends and family might think about him being gay. When Henry has always fed on people's insecurities and their shame and their fears, and so if Will can confront that fear, can tell his friends, and can discover the reality of their reactions isn't even half as scary as this little part of him had been fearing, that then lessens his fears and therefore bolsters his strength to fight Henry. I mean, I'm not completely sold on it. It denies Will the agency to make that decision for himself, but it is at least kind of interesting. That idea itself has to be explained within this same scene, because we never felt Henry taking advantage of this insecurity and fear when he last fought Will. We're told it now through exposition. Also, it annoys me how no one ever actually says the word gay. Are Netflix afraid to put it into the script? It makes what's on the one hand a scene filmed with so much sentimentality suddenly feel very inauthentic. Will deserves so much better here. And then they all just hug him and move on again like the scene never even happened. You know, there was a moment where the camera focuses on Jonathan and I thought, great. After years of nothing, Jonathan might finally be able to do something again, rekindle that old feeling of the big brother who always supported and encouraged Will. Some of my fondest memories from the early seasons is Jonathan and Will, but then again, Jonathan doesn't really have the space to say anything beyond the same natural, positive, but still very generic reaction all of them have. I think this could have been a really, really sweet, contained scene if it was between Will, Jonathan, Joyce, and Mike. At most. Those main characters Will always had a lot of chemistry with. If it had focused on just them, there would have been space again for some of that chemistry, but because there's so many people in this scene, none of them have much space at all to react in a more personal way, so the only one who can really bring the depth is Will himself, and therefore we get an overly long monologue. So basically, yes, we do find some space for character moments, but because there's still so many characters all crammed in, it always feels very stop-start in its structure. Like this season goes on with a load of plot, a load of plot, a load of plot, and then, oh my god, we can fit in a heart-to-heart here, and then more plot, and then, oh, let's squeeze in a monologue here, and then more plot, and then more plot, and then more plot, rather than a general build across all scenes that hits a natural climax and affects all of the characters going forwards. And then I just feel frustrated seeing them add even more characters. In these episodes, Vicky joins the gang to basically just be there. There's not even interesting, unique dialogue she has with Robin. It's just that same shtick again of someone not believing in all the monster stuff at first and then seeing the truth. We've seen that so much across the course of this show. Mr. Clark makes them a telemetry tag, fine, but why doesn't he then go home? It's not like the script gives us space for the same teacher-student dynamic he used to have with the kids. He's now here for no substantial reason, mostly just interacting with Murray, and neither of them have anything of merit to say, so it's just Murray calling him Snookums over and over again in moments that make this feel exactly like a Marvel movie, where Robert Downey Jr. is just giving everybody quippy nicknames as a thin veneer of humour to mask the lack of authentic interaction. Go home, Mr. Clark. Stay at a hospital, Vicky. Even Carly, who should technically have a lot to do, has almost nothing to do beyond ominously hinting Eleven will need to either die or be exiled to the abyss. Otherwise, she just awkwardly stands there in silence while people she doesn't know talk around her. Obviously, Holly and Derek are new characters that I do like, but also take up a lot of space. So, am I again concluding, like last video, that the root problem here is that there are too many characters? It's a big problem, but no, I want to make a bigger point still. I think what this show is really buckling under the weight of is the pressure for it to feel massive. Stranger Things is massive culturally and commercially. It is Netflix's big flagship statement to the world. And that is obvious even just in the fact that they decided to spread the season release across November, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. This is supposed to be a seismic event in the 2025 calendar. And I think the pressure to meet that cultural fever, and probably executive pressure, pressure with something seismic just causes this show to shoot itself in the foot. You can almost feel the desperation here to make the whole season epic. And to an extent, that is absolutely fine. I've said before, I'm happy they went all out on the action set pieces. That isn't necessarily my thing, but it is something a lot of people enjoy that can work and doesn't necessarily harm the show. But this whole season seems desperate to deliver something epic at every single moment, as though afraid viewers are going to tune out otherwise, as though afraid it won't live up to its own hype. Hence the huge monologues characters run on further and further, trying to make grander and grander statements that lack the punch you get from something concise and laconic. Hence a new big heist pretty much every episode. We don't need a heist every single episode where they all sit around and formulate a plot-heavy plan complete with diagrams before then executing it, before starting all over again with a new plan and a new heist for a new episode. A plan to find Vecna, then a plan to break into the Upside Down, then a plan to save Holly, then a plan to save Darragh, then a plan to save all the children, then a plan for Max to escape, then a plan from her and Holly, and then another plan, and then a plan for Will to attack Vecna, and then a plan to save Will from Vecna, and then a new plan to kill Vecna. God damn, there are so many plans in this season. You can't do that every single episode. It reduces the weight of everything into dull repetition. I know it's not really fair to just compare to earlier seasons, but in season 1 it was ages before the characters were actively putting plans in motion. I mean, sure, they were doing things, they were expressing agency, but it was like 5 episodes before they really came together as a team and said, right, this is what we're going to do. There was a lot of space before that where they had to uncover mystery, where they had to figure out different elements of what the right thing to do is. They had to learn, they had to grow, they had to breathe and develop as characters. In season 5 though, every beat in this story is attempting to capture that feeling, in a way that then becomes inauthentic as a result. It instead becomes exhausting and repetitive, and we get this weird dissonance where characters are always stressing that time is of the essence, always telling the audience that everything is so urgent, and then that is totally contradicted by how long they take to have monologues and how none of their heists really actually impact anything at all, so they just cycle over and over the same ground again, where things have changed plot-wise but not really story-wise until they lead vaguely towards a finale, where presumably the heist will mean something this time, but I don't feel as convinced. I think this also sums up why this season feels more like a collection of moments than a coherent story. In the effort to make everything feel big, you lose the subtler build and flow of a narrative that makes everything matter. Episode 4 here ended on a huge climax where tragically all of the kids were taken and the military was decimated. For example, why couldn't the vast majority of episode 5 then just have been a long, low beat that explores the fallout of this, gives space for grief, despair, anger, general character exploration, the gang struggling to figure out what to do next, slowly discovering a few possible clues before finally pulling together again and formulating a new plan at the very end of that episode. Not literally 18 minutes in. You make a show feel massive by making the crescendo massive, not by making every single moment its own mini crescendo. So why the pacing is weird, why the structure is so plot heavy, why the characters so bland and the dialogue such exposition heavy monologues, I think all basically stem from this problem. I could be very wrong here, and we have still got the finale next. I'm still somewhat hopeful the finale is going to pull everything together in a mostly satisfying way. And if it does that, I think fans will mostly be happy with this season. It will still be pretty entertaining, but it has also generally been an underwhelming slog in comparison to other seasons in its journey towards what feels like it might be a shallow finale. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Am I wrong? Are there bigger reasons I haven't discussed here? Like the video if you like it, subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon, either as a free member if you just want to get solid updates about my new videos coming out, or if you want to become a paid member for access to the bonus content, or to join the Discord we have. Obviously feel free to do that, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Core, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafi, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.